Welcome back, boys and girls. Costin here with my campaign as Drazhoath the Ashen. I've taken over a good portion of the Darklands, dealt with Kugath, dealt with Emmerich, dealt with Trench, allied Greases, allied Clan Moors, and now it's time to take the fight to Grimgor before he becomes too big of a threat to actually deal with. He's been stuck in a war with Kholek for quite a while now, but I don't think that's going to last, so I'm going to strike the first blow. Now, fighting Grimgor, I did install Hashut's Gunpowder Units mod. This does have a lot more gunpowder units and tanks, armored trains, but it also has a nuclear weapon regiment right now. And that's what I recruited in order to fight Grimgor. He had a fairly massive army over here, but I figured, hey, with a nuke, I should be able to kill him, right? Right? Wrong.
Say my name! Say my name!
So with Grimgor terrifying the crap out of me, and him almost being max level, I should add, in the process, I just decided that I was going to try and do as much damage with my units as possible. There were plenty of fancy visual effects with this mod, but the actual damage in itself, at least against Grimgor, was a bit of a different affair. Hey, armored trains are cool, right? Regiment Renown, especially. But even though, again, fancy effects, I wasn't necessarily just going to be able to win with range units. I mean, Grimgor had 3 Black Orcs that were fairly high level, Black Orc big bosses. He had an entire Wall army, he had an entire Garrison army, and then there was his own force, diminished as it was as a result of the nuke. At this point, I was like, yeah, I'm not going to send my tanks against Grimgor in melee, because that's just going to get them killed, so I just started throwing as many melee units against him in the process to try and kill him, or at the very least slow him down, before he did too much serious damage. It felt like I was losing a good portion of my infantry against Grimgor because he is freaking Grimgor. I mean, yeah, like the Rattling Gunners I had in this army for allied recruitment were just kind of standing still doing nothing when Grimgor was killing nearby units. They were just probably trying to pretend that if they stood still, he was gonna leave them alone. Yeah, that was a bit of a touch-and-go battle. However, it was also the only real battle I would end up having to fight against Grimgor, because he had actually been engaged in a war against Kholek and then Archaon. Archaon had wiped out Tamarkan. And with Archaon's forces coming in from the north, Grimgor only really had one proper army to throw against me. But damn, it was an army. That is no joke. It was a real freaking army. That was pretty damn terrifying. When you're throwing high-end units, including modded units, and you're still wondering if you're gonna just get slaughtered or even just, you know, be able to survive with anything left intact, then you know you've got a real fight on your freaking hands. After dealing with Grimgor, I had completed my short campaign victory conditions, so now it was time to start dealing with some of the Dwarven artifacts. I decided to fight the Ogre battle manually because, hey, using nuclear weapons is a really fun thing, and yeah, why not just completely obliterate an entire Ogre army with a damn nuclear weapon that takes minutes to reload. Very powerful, but also very vulnerable. The actual launcher itself could be destroyed very easily. Thankfully, the Ogres had just lined themselves up in a nice big blob as target practice, though I did end up actually taking more damage than I may have bargained for on some of these units, because the modded units, yeah, they can do a lot of damage, but they can also die very damn quickly. So while Drazhoath is Drazhoath and nukes are nukes, it was going to be a bit touch and go. At this point, really, I was being able to confederate the Legendary Lords of the Chaos Dwarves, getting a bunch of units, increasing armament production by quite a lot. Also, I was finally able to start using the Hellforge. And now it was time to go after the Dwarves. The first battle against the Dwarves, the first real battle outside of, you know, just dealing with settlement garrisons, the first real battle was against Thorgrim, and I used the nuke in the underway. I feel like you shouldn't be able to use the nuke in the underway because, you know, it might just collapse the entire tunnel. But yeah, I used it against one of Thorgrim's army that I had actually intercepted in the underway. I had set up a nice ambush because Thorgrim did have an entire stack of forces arrayed against me. After this stage, I decided not to use the nuke launcher anymore unless I absolutely had to. So I decided to fight Thorgrim without it. And with an army in a bad position, in bad terrain against him, I actually ended up taking a heck of a lot more damage than I may have bargained for over here. Almost lost my armor train, almost lost one of my heroes. And while obviously Thorgrim was never really in a good position to be able to defeat me, I'm not gonna lie, some of those goblin hewers, the regiments renowned, and hammers are kind of scary. The hardest battle I actually ended up having to fight over here was against Karakadrin. Not an actual field army, because it was still relatively early on in the campaign, in a sense. So the AI does start pumping out a lot of stacks later on. If you leave them for like 60 turns alone, that's when they can start pumping out very dangerous armies. I'm not gonna do so. But higher tier 5 Karakadrin army against an entire modded army of the castles, you would have thought it would have been easy, right? I had armor trains available to me with gunners. I sent them in right into the middle of it. I had freaking tanks! But Slayers are like, we don't give a shit. And so they slammed into the middle of my front line, or I didn't even have a front line. They slammed into my tanks, my range units, and then started obliterating them in a fight. I still won, but it was probably a prelude for what is going to happen later on in this campaign once I start dealing with factions that do have a lot of armies of higher-end units. Yeah, I may have a lot of armies of high-end units at this point, Kadai, all that. But still, they're quite capable of giving me a fight. And I also ended up having to fight Ungrim himself in a field battle with one of my Hobgoblin armies. So I had some Hobgoblin armies, because unit caps mean you can't just recruit endgame Chaos Dwarf units. So I had crap stacks of Hobgoblins, and one of these was on its own trying to conquer the territory, and Ungrim started coming towards them. I figured, okay, I have 4 heroes, they're fairly high level, he only has Slayers and Slayer Pirates. How hard could it be? Well, Ungrim's army, not really that difficult. Took some damage, even ended up getting my Lord routed off the field. And since one of my heroes had a tank, I figured I could deal with Ungrim. And then I remembered that Ungrim is a one-man doom stack that is quite capable of killing an entire army on his own. Having a lot of range firepower in a tank doesn't really matter all that much when Ungrim can just kill all of your heroes and maybe even come close to routing the entire enemy army on his own. I did manage to kill him, but I also lost one of my heroes. Thankfully, only got wounded. I also lost Gorduz in this battle. My Infernal Castellan almost got destroyed. Granted, I had not necessarily done a great job with building up this army, handling items, but I figured, come on, you know, just Ungrim. He's low level. Yeah, he's low HP. How hard could it be, right? Yeah, almost killing my entire army, and me having to use Hobgoblin archers and melee to even manage an actual kill. That gives you an idea of what you're dealing with, and it's why it's so important to have enemy leaders being high-level lords. But yeah, at this point, after dealing with Grimgor, after dealing with Thorgrim, after dealing with Ungrim, I had basically completed this campaign. But the Empire lay ahead, Elspeth and Karl Franz, and I also still had plenty of armies to deal with. Like, there were forces of Gorband Ironclaw to deal with in this campaign. Even some remnants of Thorgrim and Ungrim that were, you know, not quite dealt with. So I had not killed them. I had taken Karazak, I had taken their capitals, but actually completely winning against them, that was a bit different. And this is the kind of thing, like, this was turn 43, and it's kind of like at this point where the AI really starts showing its kind of like endgame potential. Like for 40 turn, and it's not because the AI changes its behavior, it's just because at this point they've got enough higher end settlements, they've saved up enough money, and they're starting to just mass produce higher end units in a campaign that are obviously going to be a far different issue to deal with than everything I had dealt with so far. So we were in for a very, very good time ahead. I mean, Ungrim still had 2 full stacks, but I figured I could deal with that. But I guess we'll find out. Questine signing out, and stay tuned for more. Nuclear warfare lies ahead.